my channel. Welcome back to another video. I'm Jessie E. This is Ravenclaw, and you're watching. Welcome to my October and November wrap-up. In the month of October, I read 6 books, and in the month of November, I read 5 books. The genres I'm gonna cover is everything from dystopian and fantasy all the way to nonfiction, so I'm really proud of how diversely I read, and I have some mixed feelings about the books in this stack. On the one hand, I have what may be my favorite book of the year, and on the other hand, I have what is probably the worst book of the year. We're going to get started by talking about my favorite book that I read in the month of October. This is a book that I have been raving about on Twitter. I know y'all who follow me on Twitter are sick of me talking about this book, and I haven't had the opportunity to discuss it in a video yet, so I'm really excited to finally be able to give concrete reasons as to why you should read this book. And what's wild about this book is it is something that I was not expecting to be phenomenal. I was offered an arc of this book, and I accepted the arc, and I honestly, from the synopsis, I wasn't super sold on the book, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I'm very, 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 very glad that I took a chance, accepted the book, and read it, because wow, I can't imagine not having read this book. I wish I could go back in time and reread it for the first time, and I just can't wait to reread it next year. And that book is none other than After the Flood by Cassandra Montague. After the Flood is a dystopian that takes place on Earth after the planet has been destroyed by tumultuous waters. This book opens up with Myra, whose daughter is kidnapped by her husband. Myra is currently pregnant with another daughter when her husband kind of gets fed up that Myra doesn't want to do what he wants to do for survival, so he decides to take their eldest daughter and just run and live their own way. So the book is about Myra chasing down her husband so that she can get her daughter back and kill this man. Earth has become a wildly dangerous place. It is absolutely impossible to survive alone. Everybody has kind of reverted to their most base instincts in order to survive, which means that the people that are left on the planet are the most capable, the most ruthless, the most cunning, and the most deceptive, violent people on the planet. It is through all of these people that Myra has to pass if she's going to travel the world in order to recover her daughter. So in that sense, it's very, very similar to the 5th season, but there is no magic in this dystopian. Because it is impossible to survive alone, Myra ends up joining this crew, and she has to kind of manipulate this crew into changing their course so that they can head closer to her daughter. The book kind of takes place 6 years after her eldest daughter, Ro, has been kidnapped. She now has a new daughter that she's responsible for caring for, and the daughter's name is Pearl. Pearl was my favorite character in the story. This little girl is a genius, and oh my god, she's incredible. This book has 2 of my favorite tropes, which is elder characters and child characters. I absolutely love when child protagonists are narrated by adults. I think that that is, oh my god, just so freaking cool. And you don't get Pearl's perspective in the book, but Pearl is so well written and such a believable character. That's part of why the book does so well, is it creates this cast of wildly believable characters that feel real. It is so amazing, and the best thing about them is that they are all morally gray. They all have wild flaws. I mean, any character who survives in a dystopian is morally gray, because there's no way to survive in a dystopian society without doing things that are immoral. It's just wild how much you come to love the characters on the ship. It reminds me so much of Long Way to a Small Angry Planet because of that. You know that found family is one of my favorite, absolute favorite tropes. And the banter between everybody is, it's freaking great. Cassandra really does a fantastic job of getting you to change your feelings on various characters. Myra herself is very, very morally gray. She is my second favorite character. I love Myra. I relate to her a lot. I think that she's very, very understandable, very, very human, and wildly well written. And I thought that she was an incredible protagonist, probably one of my favorite protagonists of all times. Very, very Slytherin, not in the sense of ambition, but in the sense of cunning. She's so violent and ruthless and intelligent and capable, and all of that comes through in the book. I absolutely love how methodical she is of a thinker, and her perspective is just entirely captivating. One of the things that this book did an incredible job of was illustrating celebrating humanity and human behavior. Judgment and anger were like objects I had received and tucked inside of me. The sentences are so straightforward but wildly poetic and relatable. I felt so seen. Definite trigger warnings for abandonment, loneliness, and suicide, and then there's mention of rape and dialogue about rape, but no rape scenes. Child death is an issue in this book too, so definitely beware. Let's talk about Myra's moral grayness and what I mean by that. The book is about her literally choosing between her two children. On the one hand, how is it possible to let go of a child that you know is still alive and still needs you? On the other hand, how do you endanger the remaining child that you have left? I love the conflicts in the story. It's so many things packed into this amazing book. I cried while reading it, and I'm excited to sit down and evaluate my end of the year favorite books list, because I know this is gonna be on it, and it's gonna be really, really tough to beat. The next book that I read was Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin or whatever. I'm not even gonna put it on the screen because I've had enough of this book. I filmed a whole review of this book if you want to see it. I've said everything that I am ever going to say about this book. On BookTube, we can't say that we want booktubers' honest reviews and then get mad at them when they provide honest reviews of books. So I firmly believe in taking the good with the bad. So if I don't like a book, I am going to give it a negative review. I'm not just going to not talk about it and pretend I didn't have issues with it. That's my personal choice. I noticed that people were making comments like, oh, Jessie doesn't like this book because of how it portrays people of color. And my video, I think, was 30 minutes long, and I talked in depth about many issues that I had. I didn't talk about race until the very, very end of the video, like the last 5 minutes of it. And honestly, like, my racial issues were some of the smallest issues that I had with the book, even though they were quite glaring. And so it kind of bothers me when people, especially white folks, disregard literally everything I say except for comments about race. I think that that's very problematic and misguided. I talked in depth about fat phobia and very troubling themes and messages in feminism and messages for girls that made me very uncomfortable, that I absolutely couldn't support. And I find it very reductive that some white reviewers in the community have made it a point to disregard all of my issues and criticisms with the book and boil it down to the couple issues that I had with race. I still get comments on that video, and you can talk about it below if you want, but I'm not gonna say anything because I'm done talking about that book. I'm moving on with my life. I'm going to continue typing and reading books that aren't harmful to me as a person of color and as a feminist. Getting books like that out of my life as a Black person, as a queer person, as a non-binary person is honestly self-care. I think a lot of the people who don't have to deal with being marginalized and degraded in books don't realize how harmful reading that is to the person who is actually marginalized. Books are not harmless. The messages in books are not harmless, and they never will be. You can choose to ignore that and be ignorant of that fact because those issues don't personally affect you, and that's fine. That's your personal choice. Or you can make it a point to see and recognize them so that you can protect readers in your community. Personally, if you like this book and want to talk about it and read it, that's totally cool. Even if you don't personally see the issues with the book, I still really encourage you, if you're going to recommend this book to somebody, to just be responsible and say, this book does have problematic content and has been hurtful to other people in the reading community. That's literally all you have to say. And for my Black Girl Magic series, I ended up reading War Girls by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is a science fiction book about two sisters. I think it's set in the year 2172, and it's about two sisters who are living in war-torn Nigeria. One of them, the sister on the cover, Onyi, is a augment. Her body has been enhanced with a mechanical arm. And then there is the younger sister, Ifi. Ifi is just very, very techy and wildly smart and precocious, and I absolutely love Ifi's character. These two sisters get separated and they have to, against all odds, fight to get back to one another. The story was really, really cool because I noticed so many political themes that were just subtly woven into the story. There's commentary on how war affects girls, but my favorite parts of the book was all of the girl power, the girl bonding, the found family, the relationships between these women, and how well written all of these women were. Just Tochi did a bang-up job of writing women. And if you want to see like a full review, definitely check out my latest Black Girl Magic vlog. Some criticism for this book that I didn't give in that vlog is the ending. So on the one hand, the ending ripped my heart out of my chest, caught me so off guard, and it hurt me very, very badly, but I thought the ending was amazing. On the other hand, there were some things that I felt weren't wrapped up. Like, one character just literally disappeared.
And I was like, what happened to old girl? Where's Where's she going?
Writing definitely lost me in some places, but overall I really, really liked the story and I would recommend it. The next book is a little bit, oh my God, it's like a little bit of a disappointing read. It's Reverie by Ryan LaSala. I think so many of us on BookTube follow Ryan, who is an absolute frickin' gem over on Twitter. And this is Ryan's debut novel, which I do believe that it is a very strong debut. It's a fantastic first start. And this is a YA fantasy, no, I guess it's YA magical realism, about this teenager named Kane. Kane is a queer boy who wakes up one day after being found half dead in the river and he can't remember anything. It's about these friends coming together and having to battle reveries, which are these dreams that you can get lost in and become reality. Some of the reveries can be just dreams and whimsy, and then other reveries are a person's psychology and can have lots and lots of horror. I started out loving this book because it had a lot of just really funny, cringy, silly, queer jokes. I thought that the jokes were really, really funny. Some people didn't. I really liked them. I really loved Dr. Posey at the start of the book. I was just head over heels for Dr. Posey's character, who, you know, at the start of the book is this androgynous, gender non-conforming, just amazing doctor.
But
I ended up giving this book 3 stars because
the world building.
Where was it? Who is she?
I did not feel that the world building was well done in this book at all. And it made me really, really sad because I think that really cool things could have been done with this concept. I think that the way that Dr. Posey's character ultimately gets portrayed is problematic, and I can't really tell you without it being spoilery, but I also just found some aspects of the story wildly unbelievable. For somebody who's under lockdown, Kane sure as hell does a lot of running around. Maybe it's because, you know, my parents are Black and Mexican, so when we're on lockdown,
We on lockdown.
we're not getting away with nothing. We're not going nowhere. I could get up off the couch and walk to the kitchen and my mama would be like,
Where you going? Where you going? Where you going?
why you ain't asked permission? Oh, you pay bills in this house? Oh, you don't? Okay, then sit your ass down and be quiet. That's literally exactly how my mother talked to me when I was grounded. I had issues with the plot. I wasn't a big fan of the world building, but I loved all the queerness. I loved the banter. And at some point in times, the writing was really, really nice. Some things were just so over the top though, but it didn't really bother me. But there's a scene where Kane and his friends are literally in mortal danger. And then Kane sees a cute boy and he's like, hi. Can you focus, Kane? People are dying. Then I read 5 Midnights, which was kindly sent to me by Tortine for review. This book follows 2 teenagers, Lupe, who is half American and half Puerto Rican, and Javier, who is a Puerto Rican teenager who is trying to figure out why his friends keep dying. Lupe is in Puerto Rico for the summer to spend time with her tío and her tía. Her father, unfortunately, suffers from alcoholism and is very irresponsible, and she's just really excited to have a break from it. Oh, I should also mention that alcoholism is also talked about in the book After the Flood. Lupe is very intrigued by the deaths that are happening in her new neighborhood and is kind of like sticking her nose in her uncle's police business because she really, really, really wants to be the one to like solve the case. And I think it's because she is just super bored at home and has a thing for crime and horror and danger, which is understandable and relatable because a lot of us do, especially as teenagers. Javier begins to suspect that there is something supernatural causing the deaths of his friends and that he might be next. I started out really, really loving this book. I was so excited and I am head over heels for the cover. I loved the mythology in this book. There's lots of Puerto Rican mythology. There's also Jamaican mythology. The theme about the power of madres was amazing, and oh my gosh, the descriptions of the food. I have been craving alcapurrias ever since I read this book. Let's talk about what I didn't like about this book. The way that Puerto Rico is portrayed is it's troubling. There have been Puerto Rican reviewers who have talked about this in depth. I am not Puerto Rican, but I was so uncomfortable with Lupe's comments about how she wanted to see the real Puerto Rico, the gritty, dirty, kind of ghetto Puerto Rico. The way that drug users are portrayed in this book is pretty messed up. Drug users are portrayed as these immoral, horrible, unintelligent people that are intentionally out ruining their lives, and I think that was very misguided, especially because Javier is a recovering drug user and you find that out very, very early. And I didn't like at all that Lupe, once she finds out that Javier was a drug user, damn near every time he came on the page, she would find a way to bring it up or shame him for it, and I just thought that that was really, really disgusting. Shame is one of the most dangerous things to somebody in recovery, and I hated that that was never once addressed. Like, I wanted to see Lupe called out for her very clear prejudice against drug users, and I see where it comes from because her father suffers from alcoholism, but I just would have liked to see more nuance in that conversation. Javier himself, now that he's sober, suddenly has no regard for people that are currently using drugs. So there are scenes where he sees people using drugs and he's like, oh, they're so stupid. And he's looking down on them and degrading them instead of having empathy for them and wanting to help them. When you suffer from an illness, you have empathy for those who have also suffered from that illness. When you're in recovery, you're not suddenly disgusted by people who use drugs. Before I switched over to being a psychology and a genetics major, I was studying addiction studies. I can tell you that the way that addiction is portrayed in this book, the way that drug users are portrayed in this book is horrendous. Also, there is a scene where one character who is very clearly struggling with his sobriety gets left in basically an opium den. Everybody else escapes and leaves this recovering heroin user in a room full of heroin. That also never got addressed, and it infuriated me to my core. Also, Lupe is very, very light-skinned. She's white passing, and she makes herself the victim of the story all the time. And also the way that Lupe's character is portrayed as like she's so oppressed because she's light and fair. Puerto Ricans are portrayed as hating everybody who's not Puerto Rican and being very intolerant of outsiders. And I just really, really didn't like that at all. Especially because this book could have had such amazing dialogue about light-skin privilege and how in Latinx cultures, lighter-skinned people are just objectively treated better. As a Mexican, this is something that I have experienced firsthand. I have seen it in my own family. What would have been a much better issue is if we talked about what it's like to be a light-skinned Latina and want to connect to your heritage, but you can't because people don't see your heritage. That is a struggle I would have loved to see instead of this weird fantasization of light-skinned girls being oppressed. Also, Lupe has this weird fetish with being in danger. She puts herself and others in danger with no regard to human life, and she never faces any consequences for her recklessness. And the final thing I want to say is some of the like sexy lines were so cringe. So cringe. Lupe is looking at her Theo and her tia, and she goes, "They were so kind to each other, so full of respect. Hashtag
Relationship goals.
It literally says hashtag relationship goals in the text. This is the author, so I just kind of feel like maybe the author was trying a little hard to be hip, trying a little too hard. And then for the sexy lines, she nodded, numb. Her name sounded like silk on his lips. Smooth, sexy silk. The heat was spreading to her limbs. He smiled that smile, the one that was higher on one side, of course it was, toppled by a small dimple on his left cheek like an accent. The smile that gave her that tingly feeling. I ended up giving the book 3 stars though because I loved certain aspects of the mythology and the culture. Some things I think the book did really, really well. Other things I think it did not so well. Also, the horror was pretty freaking cool. The horror in this book was great. There were some scenes of horror where I was like really, really kind of creeped out. There's a scene where somebody is getting stalked by this spider-like shadow creature, and that, I hate spiders. I have very, very severe arachnophobia, and that scene really got me. There's another scene where somebody is being stalked by their own shadow, and that was really cool. After that, I read another spooky book. It was my most anticipated horror book, adult horror book of the year, and that was Theme Music by Mary T. Marie Vandelli. Abby from Crime by the Book was raving about this, and I was really, really excited to read it. Also because the synopsis is probably the best synopsis for a horror book I've ever read. When Dixie is just 1 year old, her entire family is brutally and viciously murdered. And 26 years later, the house goes up for sale, and she decides that she wants to move into the house and try and figure out what happened to her family. Besides the fact that the cover is absolutely beautiful and it just puts you right in the spooky mood, this book really, really disappointed me. The horror in the book was gruesome and gory and yucky and awesome, and I freaking loved it, okay? I really liked the horror. It didn't necessarily scare me, but there were definitely wildly unsettling, violent, gruesome scenes in this book, and it satisfied my sick little heart. My issues with the book were, first of all, Dixie. Dixie sexually assaults a male character in this book, and it never gets talked about. She breaks into his house and assaults him, and then she's just bragging about it one day. Also, she stalked him, never received repercussions for that. She didn't receive repercussions for any of the sexually violent behavior that she was exhibiting. And I feel like if Dixie's character had been a male, y'all need to hold all perpetrators of sexual violence accountable. It's not cute or quirky when girls do it. It actually really, really upset me that that never got addressed and it was just portrayed as like a fun part of the story. Dixie definitely needs some therapy, y'all. You realize that this young woman is not all together there, but I still feel like we should have done something to hold her accountable for literally any of her actions. She is also like the most manipulative character I've ever read. Like, she manipulates her boyfriend. This poor guy is just ride or die for her. I felt like Dixie was a very abusive character and it made me sick. But I like the horror, so 2 stars. And now it is time for my November reads. I read 5 books in November, and the first one was Obeliskgate by N.K. Jemisin, the sequel to the 5th season. I gushed about this book. I went into intense detail and reviewed it in my Black Girl Magic vlog. So watch my latest Black Girl Magic vlog if you have not already in order to get a complete review of this book. N.K. Jemisin is amazing. This trilogy is all about Origines, who are people who can control the earth. They are oppressed. Non-magical humans resent this power and are afraid of it, and it's all about how Origines have to struggle to survive. The main character is an Origine. Honestly, about so much more than that, and I highly, highly recommend it, but this book has major trigger warnings for child abuse, violence, oppression, all the trigger warnings. So I gave Obeliskgate 5 stars, and I also gave Daughters of Inari 5 stars. This is a debut Nigerian fantasy by author Renike Amayo. Definitely my top 5 anticipated releases of the year. The most beautiful cover I've ever seen in my life. I need to get myself a finished copy. I ranted about this in, not ranted, raved. I raved about this in my last Black Girl Magic vlog too, so check out that vlog if you want all the details on my thoughts on this book. But I will say some things that I didn't mention in my Black Girl Magic vlog. On that vlog, somebody commented their issues with the book was that the villain ends up becoming very cartoonish. That is like one of my biggest pet peeves, and I was like, oh my god, how did I not realize that? And I think that the reason that it didn't bother me or why I didn't take issue with it in this book is because the book has very important themes about how pursuit of power corrupts absolutely, and this man's character is all about, from day one, wanting power and seeing the way that power corrupts him and turns him into something that is unrecognizable as a human. Kind of makes sense for the context of the story. The other point of contention this person raised was that the story does a lot of telling and not showing, which is basically when the narrator describes what's going on instead of using dialogue and creative writing techniques to illustrate what's happening. And the reason that I don't kind of get behind that criticism is because this book is told in third person omnipotent. In my opinion, it's the job of an omnipotent narrator to tell what's going on. Showing, in my opinion, is for first person. Like, there's also telling in the 5th season because that's not told in first person. Let me know down below if you agree with that or disagree, what your thoughts are. But yeah, telling does not bother me if the narration style is third person. Another reason that I enjoyed the telling aspect of the story is because this book makes me feel like a little kid. Like I'm sitting in a circle of children and a librarian is just weaving this beautiful, beautiful tale. It feels like a tale that needs to be told, and I feel like Rennie was using very traditional Nigerian styles of oration. And I think that she did that very intentionally, especially because this is a Nigerian fantasy. So the telling versus showing actually only worked to illustrate the story even more for me. The next book is a nonfiction book and definitely is going to make my favorite books of the year, and that is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. Following his career, he is an attorney who started a legal practice that specifically defends people who were harshly sentenced and wrongly convicted and sent to death row. I learned so much about the criminal justice system in this book, and I already knew quite a bit about it. The information presented in this book is done in such a factual but also such an empathic way. Bryan includes stories of so many inmates. These people feel like people that you know and love instead of just numbers in the system. I cried while reading this book, and I cried hard because yes, it is about framing and wrongful conviction, but it's also about systemic violence and how we set up certain people in our society to fail, and how even the way that the criminal justice system is set up makes it harder for people that are poor and or black and brown to receive non-guilty sentences. One of the most moving stories, and sorry, I'm getting emotional, one of the most moving stories in this book is about a woman who wanted to buy Christmas presents for her children, and this was back when Toys R Us was still a thing. And she wrote a check, she wrote a bad check for $25. $25. She was then arrested and sentenced to like 20 years in prison. And this happens all the time in this country, all the time, where poor people, people of color, commit a crime of circumstance and then are sentenced to prison, many of whom are put on death row and executed. It makes me so angry, especially because if you go back enough in history, every single Black person in America has a story like this somewhere in their family. And if you don't, you just have to go far back enough in your history. It's really hard for me to talk about this topic without getting emotional because it is a very personal and emotional topic, but it is something that everybody needs to be aware of. And if you support the death penalty and if you are pro our criminal justice system, but the only thing you actually know about our criminal justice system and the death penalty is what you learned in your high school classroom, I highly recommend that you read this book. I do want to make a point to say that this book is not just trauma. There is so much hope and light in this book, and Brian made amazing advances in the criminal justice system. You see him win a lot in this book. You see him get people off of death row. You see him win cases in the Supreme Court. Because of Brian and the Equal Justice Initiative, children are no longer being executed in America. That is a huge, huge win. After that, I read another 5-star read, and that was She Came to Slay by Erica Armstrong Dunbar. I knew after hearing Dr. Dunbar speak at the Well-Read Black Girl Festival that I absolutely had to have this book, and I was so excited when 37 Inc. reached out to me and asked if I wanted a copy. This is all about the life and times of Harriet Tubman, which I know doesn't sound wildly interesting, right? You're like, oh, I know all about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. Well, that was only 10 years of her life. Harriet lived to be 91 years old, and this book is about all of the amazing things that she did. And I'm really sad that Harriet Tubman isn't taught the way that she should be, because she would have been my hero. And I can't imagine what it would have meant to me growing up to know about the things that this young Black woman did, the things that she did as a middle-aged Black woman, the things that she did as an elderly Black woman. She was an amazing feminist, which never gets talked about. She was the first woman to lead an armed military expedition in the United States. She never ever once lost any of the slaves that she freed. That means that all of the slaves who went with her made it out of bondage. That is incredible. And no matter how hard the American government made it for Black people to survive once out of bondage, none of the slaves that she freed ever returned back to their owners. I also love all of the just beautiful, vivid art that is just woven wonderfully throughout this story. And the story is told in such an accessible way that, like, honestly, a child could read it. I actually didn't know that Harriet took slaves into Canada, and I really, one day I wanna like follow the route that she took and make a road trip out of it, because I think it would be really, really powerful to do that. Once somebody tried to remove her from sitting in a train car with white people, and she stood up and absolutely refused. And she ended up having, I think, 4 of her ribs broken, and it took 3 men to remove her from the train. That's a bad bitch. This book taught me so much too. Like, did you know that the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln gets so much credit for only offered freedom to slaves living in Confederate states? Lincoln allowed states like Maryland, Delaware, Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia to keep their slaves, all because those states never pledged allegiance to the Confederacy. Harriet Tubman was also a nurse and a frickin' spy, and she set up a hospital for geriatric old Black people because she noticed that Black folks were not being cared for in their old age. Not only that, but she rescued her 70-year-old parents out of bondage and bought them a house. I could go on and on and on about this book. I buddy read it with Lauren from the novel Lush. I highly, highly recommend this book. It's so good. Don't think that it's gonna be boring because it's nonfiction. It's not. It's amazing. It's amazing. Please, please buy it. It's incredible. And sadly, after that amazing 5-star book, I was then disappointed by another book, and this book is Stiff. Stiff is a nonfiction book by Mary Roach, and it's all about the curious lives of human cadavers. And I like horror and gruesome and weird stuff. I wanted to learn more about cadavers and mortuary science, and unfortunately, that's not really what I got with this book. People love this book so much, and when I posted it on my Instagram, everyone was like freaking out that I was finally going to be reading this book. So I was really, really excited about it, but sadly, it let me down. I did not like Mary Roach's writing style. She tries way too hard to be funny, in my opinion. And some of her jokes I honestly found to be in kind of poor taste. There were multiple scenes in this book in which she was allowed to observe certain autopsies or be around a cadaver. She like will make jokes about that cadaver. I don't see anything wrong with making jokes about dead people, but I think that there's something kind of, it just kind of rubs me the wrong way to be like literally standing over somebody's dead body and be making jokes like that. I didn't like that. I just wish that this book was less of her making jokes and storytelling and just providing the factual information. So if you kind of like that lightheartedness in your nonfiction reads, then you would probably love this. Most people did, but it was so annoying. I ended up skipping a lot of her jokes and tangents for pages. And I would skip those pages because I was like, I'm reading this for the factual information. That's all I want. But I will share you some really cool facts that I learned as a result of reading this book. Fact number 1, did you know that human testicles and the penis swells up like over the size of a softball after death? So basically, corpses are very well endowed. Did you know that human remains dogs can pinpoint the location of a corpse at the bottom of a lake by sniffing the water's surface for the gases and fats that float up from the rotting remains? Cadavers have also been used to make vehicles safer for us folks that are still living, which basically means that there have been many crash tests with dead people behind the wheel. As a result, cadavers have saved 8,500 lives each year since 1987. For 6 to 8 hours after death, the blood inside of a dead body remains sterile. And red blood cells still contain their oxygen-carrying capabilities. There we have it. Those are all of the books that I read between the month of October and November. Definitely a mixed bag of reading. Let me know if any of these books sound interesting to you, or if you learned anything from this video that you didn't know about. And if you made it this far in the video, comment down below with the word flood, mainly because I really want everybody to read After the Flood. All of my social media links are in the description box below, and I hope to see you in my next one.